The 17th of June, 1994, the world stopped across America. 95 million people abandoned their routines and glued their eyes to the glow of television screens. The scheduled programming of the NBA Finals had vanished, erased by a singular, surreal image broadcast from the sky. News helicopters circled the 405 freeway like birds of prey, their cameras locked onto a white Ford Bronco crawling through the heavy afternoon traffic. It was a slow-motion procession, a ghost ship moving through a sea of brake lights and asphalt. Below, the highway was a stage of confusion. Drivers pulled over, stepping out of their cars to stare up at the sky or down the lanes, watching as the vehicle crept forward. Inside that cabin sat a man who had defined an era, a household name now cornered by the law. His hand held a weapon against his own temple. The air in every living room across the country felt thin, pressurized by the weight of a tragedy unfolding in real time. You think you know the story, but the truth is far more jagged. This is the moment the facade cracked, and the long, dark descent began. Years before the freeway, there was another path. Orenthal James Simpson climbed out of the San Francisco projects through sheer physical dominance. He became a Heisman Trophy winner, a professional athlete, and a face that sold everything from rental cars to movies. He was untouchable, a man who seemed to own the public affection of a nation. But the walls of his private life held a different reality. In 1985, he married Nicole Brown. The public saw a power couple. The neighbors heard the sounds of a house under siege. The phone lines began to hum with urgency. Nicole dialed 911 repeatedly, her voice recording the descent into a cycle of control and rage. By 1989, the record was undeniable. A plea of no contest to spousal battery following a brutal assault. The legal system touched him, but it did not change the trajectory. By 1992, the marriage ended in divorce, yet the isolation of the house on Rockingham only intensified the pressure. The fame remained, but the stability had evaporated, replaced by a volatile environment where the boundary between celebrity and assailant blurred into a singular, dark threat. The 12th of June, 1994, began like any other Sunday. Nicole Brown Simpson attended her daughter's dance recital, the rhythm of a normal life still intact. Later that evening, at a restaurant called Mezzaluna, Ron Goldman found a pair of glasses left behind by Nicole's mother. He decided to return them. It was a brief, simple act of kindness. He drove to the residence on Bundy Drive. Stepping out into the quiet night, he never walked away. At 10:15 p.m., the silence of the neighborhood broke. A neighbor walking his own dog encountered an Akita pacing near the property. The animal was agitated, its paws stained dark. The neighbor followed the dog, drawn toward the courtyard. He pushed past the gate and stopped. The light from the path revealed a nightmare. Two bodies lay on the ground, surrounded by evidence of a frantic, terminal struggle. Defensive wounds marked the skin, and the air held the metallic scent of blood. The normalcy of the evening had vanished, replaced by a crime scene that would soon consume the entire country. The investigation moved fast. Detectives followed a trail of blood drops from the courtyard gate to the public street. They moved to the Rockingham estate and found the white vehicle parked near the entrance. Dark stains marked the exterior. The investigators opened the doors and found more blood inside, a collection of samples later linked to the victims and the owner of the house. Behind the guest house, they found a single object that would define the coming trial. A leather glove, soaked in blood, a perfect match to one discovered at the Bundy scene. The physical evidence pointed toward a singular conclusion, but the house was silent. The investigators knocked. No answer. They searched the rooms. Empty. The suspect had slipped through the net, vanishing into the night toward Chicago before the authorities could make an arrest. The status of the investigation shifted instantly from a homicide inquiry to a high-stakes search for a missing icon. The police alerted their units, the news desks scrambled, and the manhunt began. The man who had been a hero to millions was now the most wanted person in the country, and he was nowhere to be found. Police cornered him in Chicago, but he refused to yield. Instead of handing himself over, he climbed into the back seat of the white Ford Bronco. Al Cowlings took the wheel. They pulled out onto the street, not speeding away, but moving with a strange, deliberate slowness. Within minutes, the sky above them filled with news helicopters, their rotors beating the air like a mechanical storm. The camera lenses tracked the vehicle as it merged onto the 405 freeway. It did not race. It crawled. 20 miles per hour. The sight stopped traffic in both directions. Drivers killed their engines just to watch. Then the overpasses began to fill. People ran up the concrete ramps, leaning over the rails. They did not boo. They did not throw stones. They waved signs. They cheered for the man hiding in the back seat, holding a gun to his own head. The scene defied logic. A fugitive hunt had transformed into a parade. The sirens wailed below, a dissonant soundtrack to the applause above. The Bronco inched forward, a white coffin rolling through the heart of Los Angeles. 95 million eyes locked onto their screens, witnessing a surreal theater of fame and despair. The vehicle turned off the freeway, heading toward the Rockingham estate. The slow drive was ending, but the grip on the nation's throat only tightened. The final act was about to begin. The engine cooled at Rockingham, but the war only changed terrain. Within days, the circus moved from the freeway to the courtroom. The prosecution opened fire first. They laid out a mountain of DNA evidence, strand by strand. Blood on the gate, blood in the car, blood on the sock. The scientists spoke in probabilities so high they felt like certainties. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of biological fact. It seemed like a closed case. Then, the dream team stood up. They did not touch the blood. They did not question the science. Instead, they turned their eyes to the men who collected it. They dragged the LAPD into the light. They exposed Detective Mark Fuhrman. Tape recordings played in open court, capturing a man spewing racial slurs, lying under oath, boasting of brutality. The defense hammered the point home. If the source was rotten, the fruit was poison. The narrative snapped. The trial ceased to be about two bodies in a courtyard. It became a referendum on Los Angeles itself. The jury watched as the prosecution's fortress crumbled. Not from lack of evidence, but from a targeted strike against the system that gathered it. The room divided. Half saw a murderer caught red-handed. The other half saw a setup by a corrupt machine. The gavel struck, but the noise outside drowned it out. The legal battle had become a cultural civil war, and there was no middle ground left to stand on. The noise in the courtroom died instantly. A single evidence bag was opened. Inside lay the black leather glove, stiff with dried blood. Recovered from the crime scene, the prosecution asked Simpson to stand. He rose slowly. The deputy handed him the matching glove found on his own property. The instruction was simple. Put it on. Simpson slid his right hand forward. The leather resisted. He pushed harder. His knuckles whitened as he forced the material down, but the fingers stopped halfway. He twisted his wrist. He yanked. The glove bunching up, refusing to seal around his palm. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The prosecution's face tightened. Simpson strained again. Muscles in his forearm corded, grimacing as he fought the shrinking hide. It did not fit, not even close. He held up his hands, one bare, one trapped in the ill-fitting leather, displaying the failure to the entire room. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, Johnny Cochran stepped forward. He saw the opening and drove the knife home. He did not shout. He spoke with a rhythmic, hammer-like precision that echoed off the wood paneling. "If it doesn't fit," he said, locking eyes with the jury, "you must acquit." The words landed like a gavel strike. The mountain of DNA evidence suddenly felt distant, overshadowed by the simple physics of a hand that could not close. The defense had turned a piece of evidence into an exit door. The trial was no longer about what happened on Bundy Drive. It was about the glove in the room. The jury walked out, and the world held its breath. 24 hours, maybe 48, the experts predicted. The country braced for a long, agonizing wait. Then, the signal came. Less than 4 hours later, they were back. The courtroom doors swung open, and the silence was absolute. The lead juror stood. 2 words shattered the atmosphere. Not guilty. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into a chaotic mix of screams, cheers, and sobbing. Some fell to their knees in relief, pumping fists at the sky. viewing it as a victory against a broken system. Others stood frozen, faces drained of color, staring at the screens in disbelief. The fracture was instant. Across the country, television showed a nation unspooling. In living rooms, in bars, on city streets, the arguments started before the news anchors could even finish their sentences. To one half, the verdict was a correction of history. To the other, it was a catastrophic failure of justice that left two families without closure. The legal process had hit its end, but the social earthquake was just beginning. There was no middle ground left. The country had split down the center, and the silence that followed the verdict was louder than the noise that preceded it. The criminal acquittal did not provide the final word. In 1997, the parents of the victims brought the case back to life in a civil courtroom. This time, the burden of proof was lower, and the outcome shifted. The jury held him liable for the deaths, ordering a payment of $33.5 million. He fled to Florida, hiding his assets behind state laws to avoid the debt. The man who once occupied the peak of American fame began a slow, public descent. He lived in the margins, publishing a book that attempted to profit from the tragedy, only to see it rebranded by the victims' families. The facade finally shattered in 2007. In a Las Vegas hotel room, he led an armed group to confront collectors over sports memorabilia. He brandished a weapon, barked orders, and took property by force. The police arrived, the evidence was documented, and the law caught up to him. A judge sentenced him to prison. The gates closed behind him for 9 years. The man who had once been untouchable, who had commanded the attention of 95 million people on a freeway, now moved through a landscape of concrete and iron. His status had vanished. The icon was gone, replaced by a prisoner. The public disgrace was complete, and the long, slow erosion of his legacy reached its lowest point. 9 years later, the prison gates opened, and he stepped back into a world that had long since moved on. He spent his final years in the quiet corners of society, far from the cameras and the crowds that once defined his existence. On the 10th of April 2024, the end arrived. Cancer took him at age 76. With his final breath, he took the truth to the grave, leaving behind a void where answers should have been. For Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, there would be no final resolution. Their lives ended prematurely at 35 and 25, frozen in a night of violence that shattered two families. For 30 years, those families have lived in the long, dark shadow of a verdict that never brought peace. The legal files are closed. The courtroom is empty. The public debates have faded into history, yet the silence remains profound. The victims are gone, their futures erased, and the mystery of that night on Bundy Drive remains locked away. This has been Final Statement. Remember them. The names are Nicole and Ron. Their stories did not end with a gavel. They continue in the memory of those who refuse to let the silence be the final word.